This is the last session, the last leg, not session. It will take a couple of sessions to do that, of our series of introductions to major halachic works. I mean, there are other important halachic works. We cannot cover all of them. I picked one from each transitional period and generation. So this one is by Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, who dominated we could say, the 20th century in Israel, and when you look at the Sephardic world, probably outside Israel as well, very influential, especially in his pull towards reviving the halachot of the Shulchan Aruch of Rabbi Yosef Karo. And this is what we're going to do today. We're going to start the introduction of his book called Yabia Omer, which is a book of response of halachic and halachic questions and answers. And in his introduction revolves around the theme of the hierarchy of halacha, meaning what are the books that you rely on, what are the sources that you rely on when you come to issue a halacha. You also speak about the methodology of learning and what is the authority of each posek, of each rabbi in his generation and place. And as we'll see, there's in my opinion, there's quite a confusion between the sources that he quotes. They go from those who preach originality to those who say you must follow those who lived before you. Those who say you could argue with current or previous authorities, and those who say you cannot. But he seems to mix them all together towards one goal, which, as we have already seen in the introduction of Maimonides, the Tool, the Shulchan Aruch, the Mishnah Berurah, Aruch HaShulchan, all of them eventually lead to the argument that this book is the book that you must use, that this halachic author is the one that you must rely on. We don't find authors of such books preaching diversity or pluralism of even within their own realm. They won't say, for example, Rabbi Ovadia Yosef would not say, I think that we should follow the Shulchan Aruch, but if you follow the Rama or you follow your minhag, it's okay, you're good. Well, there's usually a tendency towards imposing one opinion on all. Even the Bet Yosef, Rabbi Yosef Karo, who left his book open-minded, he didn't argue that you must follow one opinion, but he wanted people to follow his book. So we'll see as we go through the text what is happening here. So this is an introduction to the first volume of Yabia Omer. He says this: Horunu rabotenu b'Yerushalmi, kol Torah she'en la bet av ena Torah. The rabbis taught us in the Yerushalmi Talmud that Torah without a family is not a Torah, or Torah without a pedigree is not a Torah, meaning that there must be tradition. You must rely on the previous generation. וישמיענו כי אין להורות הלכה למעשה אלא על פי יסודות נאמנים בתלמוד. Now this is his own conclusion, that you cannot rule halacha without solid foundations in the Talmud. And that conclusion has to be questioned. When they say kol Torah she'en la bet av, that it must have a family, must have a basis. Do they necessarily refer to the Talmud? Do they refer to logic or tradition? Is Talmud the only tradition that we have? But we'll leave that aside. Those are things that we've discussed in the past. He quotes here Rav Paltoy Gaon, one of the heads of the Yeshivot in Bavel, and he says that, I'm just summarizing his conclusion, you should not learn halachot ktu'ot, clear-cut halacha, or final verdict. Rather, you should look at the Talmud. Then he goes in entry bet, עוד bet, he says, ומכל מקום, אף שעיקר ויסוד ההלכה בתלמוד, אין בכוחנו להוציא דין מן הגמרא, בלא עיון בפוסקים ראשונים ואחרונים. Even though the foundation and the basis of the halakha is in the Talmud, we do not have the ability to derive a law or a halakha from the Talmud without thoroughly analyzing the books of the Rishonim and Aharonim that lived before us. Rishonim usually refers to the period between 1000 to, we could roughly say it's 1000 to the 1500s, and Aharonim from the 1500s to maybe late 1800s. The period that we live now, the last 150 years, is sort of still foggy. We did not decide what to call it because it's an immediate period. You don't name a period when you're still part of that period. Usually it comes afterwards. But how do you get to this conclusion? If it was said so clearly before that, that you must have foundations in the Talmud when you approach the question of halakha, then why would I not be able, you, anyone else, not be able to approach the Talmudic text, analyze it, and issue halakha based on it? Where from do you derive this axiom, and bekohenu lotzi din min hagmara belo ayun b'poskim rishonim v'achronim? There's no way that we, our generation, could rule based on the Gemara without analyzing the vast literature of halakha that came afterwards. He quotes Rabbi Yosef ibn Megas. We spoke about him. This is the man that Rambam considered to be the master of his masters. And they asked Rabbi Ben Ibn Megas, what would you say of one she'eno yodea derech halakha lo kriyata velo perusha? He does not understand the path of halakha. They refer to halakha as discussed in the Talmud. He doesn't know how to read it clearly or to interpret it clearly. אלא שראה הרבה מתשובות הגאונים. But he read a substantial part of the response of the Geonim, who lived immediately after the Talmud. מי שאינו מבין עיקר הדין ולא מקורו מן התלמוד, אם מותר להורות. We want to know if one doesn't know the source of the law and its essence as is stated by the Talmud, can he issue psak halakha? So that's the question that the Rabbi Ibn Megas was asked. So here we're talking about someone who would rule based on later books without knowledge of the Talmud. תשובה, דע שהאיש הזה ראוי להתיר לו להורות יותר מאנשים רבים שקבעו עצמם להורות בזמן הזה. This man deserves to be a מורה הוראה, a posek, someone who issues halachic rulings, more than many people who took it upon themselves, meaning they assume the responsibility to be posek halacha, to be decisors of halacha, ורובם אין בהם לא הבנת ההלכה ולא העמידה על דעת הגאונים. But most of these people don't fully understand halacha and they don't understand what the Geonim who lived after the Gemara said. ואותם שמדמים להורות מחוזק עיונם בתלמוד הם שראוי למונעם מזה, לפי שאין בזמננו זה מי שראוי לכך. So those who one second. Those who attempt to rule based on the Talmud are making a mistake. You must prevent them because we don't have anyone in our generation who has that level. So we've seen this before. This is about Ibn Megas writes about 700 years or 800 years after officially the editing of the Talmud has ceased. And he says, we don't have anyone in our generation who could do that. So, Rabbi Ovadia Yosef concludes, Asher al ken, ראוי להתבסס בעיקר על פי פסקי הראשונים אשר מפיהם אנו חיים, עם חקירת וידיעת טעמן ונימוקם על פי התלמוד, והבלוה לא סגיה. Therefore, we should rely on the rulings of the Rishonim, of the early rabbis, 10 to 1500s, alongside the analysis and the understanding of the reason from the Talmud, because one without the other do not work, they're not sufficient. You see the contradiction, right? The original statement, if you go back, the original statement is you have to have foundations in the Talmud. The second statement is from Ri ibn Megas. It's better not to look at the Talmud and just follow the halachot as we have them today. The conclusion of Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, you have to rely on the written rulings of the previous generations and know very well their source in the Talmud. A proof to that is the Teshuvah of Rabbeinu Asher, the Rosh, כל המורים הוראות מתוך דברי הרמב"ם ז"ל ואינם בקיאים בגמרא לדעת מהיכן הוציא דבריו. All those who issue halachic rulings based on the words of Maimonides and they don't know where is the source in the Talmud, they are mistaken, but not mistaken in the sense they don't understand halacha, but rather they permit that which is forbidden and forbid that which is permitted. כי הוא כתב ספרו בלא טעם וראיה, והקורא בו סבור שהוא מבין בדבריו ואינו כן. It says Rambam, Maimonides wrote his book without providing the sources, without providing an argument. And those who read the books think that they understand him, but they don't. And therefore, one cannot base halacha only on Maimonides. So, and we go back to the beginning of this clause. It started with quoting Ri ibn Megas, who was the master of Maimonides, who says, you don't need the Talmud. What you need is the clear-cut books of halacha. And here you have someone who disagrees with Maimonides and says, you can't rely on Maimonides and you can't use this clear-cut halacha. You have to go back to the Talmud. And he quotes a couple other rabbis who quote the same statement, and which is the problem of recycling in general. That when you look, especially with the books of Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, you get into long discussions on each and every issue, and sometimes you would be awestruck by the wealth of sources and number of opinions that are rallied to support a certain cause. But you have to remember that we must conduct this analysis and check whether we have an original primary source or a secondary source. For here, for example, he quotes the Rosh, and then he says, V'chenu b'tshuvat Arivash, and this also how Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Sheshat, who lived in Algeria, and came from the first wave of exiles from Spain, says the same thing. When he says the same thing, it's not that he presents a similar argument, but rather he quotes Rabbeinu Asher verbatim. So that's not an additional proof. That's just saying someone else agreed with that. And now he... Can
I ask a question?
Yes.
So it doesn't seem like Ovadia Yosef is contradicting himself. It seems like he's reconciling two opinions.
He's trying to reconcile the two opinions, but he doesn't tell you, when I say it's a contradiction, because he doesn't say, we have here two contradicting opinions. We have one opinion that says that you must look at the Talmud, which is, by the way, his opinion, and another opinion that says you must rely on the later books. He doesn't say that. He just says, you see that you must do this, and he just piles up all this information as if it supports one idea. So the way it is presented is you must combine the Talmud with the Poskim. The ideal way to present it would be, on one hand, we see that you could rely on the Talmud. On the other hand, we see that you could rely on the Poskim. The reconciliation, like you suggest, the solution would be do both. analyze the Talmudic text, compare it to the halacha, and maybe ask the question, how did they get here from there? But he doesn't say that.
Excuse me, that's what I was thinking. Like, it's okay, you can use the poskim, the rishonim, as long as you have an understanding of how they derived.
Right. No, so that is legitimate. That is legitimate. If you present it in that manner, that is okay. But here's my my bone to pick with this book, with other books as well, that sometimes those ideas are obfuscated. They're not clearly explained, and we receive a barrage of axioms. This is what you do. This is what you do. And here, we'll see the confusion growing as we continue. And then, like I said, it's to support the argument. At the end of the day, the argument is that Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, despite being a late author who lives in the 20th century, despite that, he has the authority to disagree with all the rabbis who lived before him. But his contemporaries and those who will come after him will have no right to argue with him. So it's an interesting argument, and gives him also a lot of power to be the sole decider of halacha. So now he goes back to the Talmud. V'ayen besota hamorin halacha mitoch mishnatan haren mevalei olam. He quotes the Gemara in Masechet Sota that says those who rule halacha based on the Mishnah destroy the world. Now, remember that we spoke from the very beginning of our sessions about the importance of chronology. That we have to know when, with a specific statement, when and where it was said. So this is a Talmudic statement that quotes an Amoraic source, because I know that because of the language, and it refers to the Mishnah as redacted by Rabbi Nasi, and says that if you rule halacha directly from the Mishnah, you are going to destroy the world. That is because the language of the Mishnah is not clear, and the one of the main occupations of the Talmud Bavli and Talmud Yerushalmi is to try and figure out how exactly the language of the Mishnah works, because sometimes you have inner contradictions, you have redundancy, and this is exactly the issue that we were dealing with when we were going through the Mishnah. We were dwelling on that point to say that Rabbi Nasi did not work in his final redaction, did not work to provide us with a clear and lucid text where there are no contradictions, no repetitions. Rather, he took existing files and merged them together, and that's the reason of sometimes the lack of clarity of the language of the Mishnah. So that's understood, this statement of the Talmud, to say that sometimes it's problematic to rule directly on Mishnah. It is understood, but one could never argue that if you ruled based on the Mishnah and your reading of the Mishnah is supported by the text, that ruling is valid. I mean, it's going to be challenged later on if it's going to be legislated. But as long as you could support your arguments of the Mishnah, it's okay. But we'll put this aside, because this goes back to the question of the authority of the Mishnah. But here's the temporal leap, or leap in time, from Sota, the Talmud. This is a statement that maybe was made in the 2nd, 3rd century, to the Maharsha, Rabbi Shmuel Idilis, who wrote a commentary on the Talmud, and he is 16th century. And he says, Ubadorot alalu. Now, looking at this statement that you cannot rule halacha based on the Mishnah, he says, Otam shemurim halacha mitoch hashulchan aruch, v'harei em enam yud'im ta'am ha'inyan shel kol davar. Says the statement that is mentioned in the Talmud regarding the Mishnah is applicable today to those who rule based on the Shulchan Aruch, and they do not know the original reason for each halacha, and therefore, because of that, אם לא ידקדקו בדבר מתוך התלמוד שהוא שימוש תלמיד חכם, טעות נופל בהוראתן, והרי בכלל מבלי עולם, ויש לגרור בהם. If they do not go back to the Talmud and analyze the whole discussion, and they're missing on serving a rabbi. They issue wrong rulings, and they destroy the world, and they must be rebuked. So those two words, Shimush Tamid Hacham, are important. Shimush Tamid Hacham means serving a scholar as an apprentice. A young rabbi would be assigned to an older rabbi, and it would be at his home, at his rabbinic court, observe his reactions, because the belief was that Ma'aseh Gadol Me'alacha, the way you see the rabbi in action, responding to real life crises and answering questions, there are so much that cannot be written that must be included in the Shimush Tamid Hacham. So this is an example of equating the literature with living masters, because the Maharsha calls learning the Talmud Shimush Talmid Hacham. It's as if he's saying the Talmud is a live recording of the rabbis and their arguments, and therefore, when you study the Talmud, you are being transported directly into their Bet Midrash, and you study with them. This statement, on its face, is not true, because the Talmud is not a recording of a live discussion. The Mishnah is closer to that, and we see in the Mishnah sometimes arguments between Rabbi Tafon, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Yeshua, who are all contemporaries, and they talk to each other. Rabbi Akiva says that, Amar lo Rabbi Yeshua, Akiva, Yeshua turned to him and says, Akiva, if this is what you think, it's this and that. You don't see this in the Talmud. In the Talmud, to the contrary, you will have Rabbi this and that said so. What does he rely on? He relies on the opinion of this rabbi, and when you check the dates, the one he relies on lived 200 years later. So obviously he didn't really rely on him, but rather the editor of the Talmud edited. But the Maharsha says that reading the book is like serving a master. And that's an important, crucial statement that later on will distort our relationship with halakha. Because when you turn the book into a living master, then whenever you issue halakha, you must acknowledge all the books that were written before you. Whereas the Torah says, you should go to the judge who is local and is a contemporary of yours. And that's understood why the Torah would do that, because the Torah wants the judge, the shofet, the rabbi, to be well aware of the problems of the community or the problems of the nation at the time that he is the halachic authority. To rule for Jews today based on concepts from 300, 400, 500 years ago could be problematic. Not impossible, but problematic. But when you make the book a master, the rabbi could always say, I consulted all the rabbis. I consulted my library. That's it. I don't need more than that. I need more than that because I need to go back and analyze all the books. You realize what happens when you had only the Talmud. Look at the Talmud. When you have the Geonim say either look at our stuff or look at the Talmud. Maimonides comes a couple hundred years later and says, no, forget about all these books. Just read my book. But the rabbis reject him and say, no, read his book and all the literature before him. And if today you go to yeshiva, you will have to learn Maimonides with all the commentaries on him. Kesef Mishneh, Lechem Mishneh, Magid Mishneh, Merkevet HaMishneh, like tons of books written on Maimonides, and still the core of the teachings in the yeshivot, especially those who come from the Soloveitchik brisk tradition, where you must reconcile Maimonides with the Talmud. So the majority of the study is focused on Maimonides, and not enough authority or autonomy is given to the posek of today to analyze the halakha. So here we have Maharsha, who lives shortly after the Shulchan Aruch, and it says, if you rule halakha based on the Shulchan Aruch, you are going to make a mistake. That pulls the rug from under the feet of the Shulchan Aruch. And Rabbi Ovadia Yosef quotes another one, the author of Me'irat Einhaim, וכן כתב הסמ"ר, ספר מאירת עיניים, in his introduction to Hoshel Mishpat. Hoshel Mishpat is the part that deals with the judicial and monetary issues. He says, Kavanat Maran v'harema b'Shulchan Aruch hayta. The intention of Maran and the Rema in the Shulchan Aruch was שלא יפסקו מתוך השולחן ערוך, not to rule based on the Shulchan Aruch, unless you have studied previously Arba'at Turim, the book upon which the Shulchan Aruch relies, ve'abet Yosef, and read the commentary, ve'yada mekor kol din ve'ta'amo ma'atalmud v'aposkim. You need to know the full background of every halacha. Now, I agree that it's good to know the background of every halacha when you need to understand what you're doing, when you need sometimes to change it. But to say that if you ruled without doing that, you just went to the Shulchan Aruch, what does the Shulchan Aruch say on, let's say, participation of women in a funeral? He says ABC, I'll choose one of them, I'm okay. The Sma says, no, you're wrong. You made a mistake because you didn't go back to the Talmud. So, we have again the insistence of the Shulchan Aruch with other books. And this is not what the Shulchan Aruch said in his introduction. We read it last week with the introduction of Aruch HaShulchan. Again, the same argument that the Shulchan Aruch was only meant for great scholars who could master all of the Bet Yosef with all of the long commentary. This is contradictory to what Rabbi Yosef Karo himself wrote in the introduction to Shulchan Aruch, to the Bet Yosef. He says, I want people to be able to finish the Shulchan Aruch in 1 year, and it should serve the scholars and the novices. Those are just beginners. That's really interesting development in the halachic literature, but it seems to follow a trend that with every added period, where you have someone who comes and says, this is what you have to learn, that's it, you don't have to go back to the Talmud, the next generation says, no, you have to study this with the Talmud. So, and then you see how it becomes an obstacle for later generations. It was at the time of Moshe Rabbeinu, all you had to know was the Torah and the oral law. Then at the time of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, you have to know the Mishnah as well, then the Talmud, then the Rambam, then the Torah, then the Shulchan Aruch, and you have to be able to compare them all and analyze them all. Now, look at what the Sma, the Me'irat Einhaim, says about the one who, the way you have to approach halacha. Lo yifseku mitoch HaShulchan Aruch. You should not rule based on the Shulchan Aruch unless you've studied the Arba'at Turim and the Bet Yosef, the commentary on the Tur. V'yeda mekor kol din v'ta'amo me'atalmud v'aposkim. You have to know the source and origin of every law from the Talmud and later books. מה שאין כן בזמן הזה שמורים מתוך השולחן ערוך הם מחריבי עמנו. It says those who rule based on the Shulchan Aruch destroy the nation. That's a very harsh statement, and I'm not sure that Rabbi Yosef Karo would be happy with it if he would have heard that later rabbis say that if you issue a halachic ruling based on his book, you are causing destruction. Okay, it moves on. Now that we made these statements, and we go back and forth between saying that following a clear-cut halacha is okay, is good, even if you don't know the Talmud, to saying that the Talmud is the source, and offering sort of a reconciliation of knowing both, which is not really, it's a reconciliation in the sense of it solves the contradiction between the two opinions, but it doesn't really provide for us a clear path or an easy path when we come to issue halacha. And now it goes back to the Talmud. ידוע מה שאמרו רז"ל, טובת ציפורנם של ראשונים מקרסם של האחרונים. The rabbi said in the Talmud that the fingernail of the first generation is better or greater than the belly of later generations. Now, that statement originally was said regarding the destruction of the two temples. They said that the people who lived at the time of the first temple were better than the people who lived in the period of the Second Temple. Here's the original statement in Yoma 9:2. It says, Mikdash Rishon mipnei maharav. What was the cause of the destruction of the first temple? Because of three sins: idolatry, adultery, and murder. And they bring the sources for each. Mikdash Sheni, but the second temple, in which they were engaged in Torah, in mitzvot, and acts of loving kindness. Why was it destroyed? Because they hated each other. It was baseless hatred, and that is tantamount or greater to idolatry, adultery, and murder. And then they question that statement, saying, "You want to tell me that in the first temple there was no animosity?" Here, let me quote to you verses from Ezekiel, and they could have done Yirmiyahu as well. But they move on and say, that's by Rabbi Yohanan Rabbi Eliezer, people who lived about 200 years after the destruction, and they say, Rishonim nidgala avonam nidgala kitzam. The early generations were sinners, but their sin was obvious, and that's why their redemption was also obvious and revealed, and within 70 years they were back. Whereas we, or the people of the Second Temple, we seemed to be religious, but we were not. It's like hypocrisy. So for that reason, our end is concealed. And here, Rabbi Yohanan says, "Tova tzipornan shel rishonim mikresam shel haronim." The fingernails of the former are preferable to the belly of the latter. I think it was the Maharal who explained that by saying, in context of the previous statement, that the four animals that are not kosher that were mentioned in last week's parasha in Shemini are fall into two categories. One is a gamal, arnevet, ve'ashafan, the camel, the rabbit, and the hare, or the daman, depending how you read it. Those three chew their cud, but do not have split hoofs. Whereas the pig has the hoofs are split, or the hooves are split, but it doesn't chew its cud. So and he compares that to the tzipor nafsh rishonim, with the camel, for example. The moment you look at its feet, that's the fingernail, you know it's not kosher, even though it chews its cud. But with the pig, the fingernails pretend to be kosher, whereas the inside part, the belly, is hidden, and because it doesn't chew its cud. Be it as it may, it is what we call agadeta. It's not halacha. It's a midrashic statement. It's the frustration of people who lived 200 years after the destruction. They look at the first temple. They say the first temple was rebuilt. Ours not rebuilt. We're not good enough. There's no indication here that there's greater knowledge of halacha in the previous generations. There are other sources, and the other sources say that, like here in Eruvin, the heart of the early generations was open like the gate of the palace or the temple, and we are compared to the hole made by a needle. And they keep on saying how lowly we are in comparison to previous generation, which is a common reaction following a crisis. The destruction of the temple was a cataclysmic event, and following that destruction, people look back and say, we are nothing compared to the people who lived during the time of the temple. And then this mentality was carried on, and Rabbi Ovadia Yosef adds, if this is how those generations felt, that they cannot argue with their predecessors, what can we answer? As Anan Yatmei de Yatmei. We are the orphans of the orphans. Like an orphan who's the son of an orphan, like we're nothing. Again, the same approach. And he quotes the Or Zarua, who was brought in the Haim Moshe. So the Haim Moshe is written by the Rema, Rabbi Moshe Israel, contemporary of Rabbi Yosef Karo. Or Zarua is Rabbi Yitzhak of Vienna, who lived in the 13th century, shortly after, not shortly in our terms, but in terms of Jewish history, it was shortly after Rashi, maybe 150, 200 years after Rashi. And look what the Or Zarua says. Omer ani Yitzhak bar Moshe, I say, הנה הגאונים שכתבו אין לדיין אלא מה שעיניו רואות, הוא רש"י ז"ל. It says the great authors, the Gaonim is a versatile term, and it's also dangerous, because today every rabbi is called the Gaon, sort of like a genius or the great scholar, but depends on when you look at it in halakha. There's a certain up to a certain period, it only refers to the Gaonim of Babylonia, and he says the authorities who wrote En la dayan ela ma she'einav ro'ot, which means that the judge must follow what he sees. That in itself, in parentheses, I should say, is a statement that went through a transformation, because originally when it was mentioned in the Talmud, it was a defense mechanism for the judge. The Talmud in Masechet Sanhedrin discusses the fear of rabbis, the fear of issuing halakha. The rabbi says, and not usually, this specifically refers to monetary cases where you have we have the litigants, you have the plaintiff, you have the accused, and one side says that he owes me money, or he committed, he offended me, he committed a crime, whatever. The judge says, I don't want to bear the burden of responsibility of ruling in favor of A or B, because maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm being misled by the evidence, by the witnesses, and so on. And the Gemara, or the Mishnah, in order to soothe his concern, says, En la dayan ela ma she'einav ro'ot. Do not worry. You just rule based on the evidence that is in front of you. And as long as you guided the discussion correctly, and you were not biased, you're okay. Even if the evidence was false, because you had no way to expose this evidence as false. Later on, this phrase has completely metamorphed, like changed into a saying that says that the only guiding principle for the judge is his own eyes. Meaning, if there's evidence in front of you, but you feel that there's distortion, discard the evidence and go after the litigants. Try to find who's cheating. And there are rules for that. Is the plaintiff the cheater? Is the accused the cheater? When do you help them? What if you recuse yourself? Are they going to go to another bedin? There's a solution for that as well. But by the time Rabbi Yitzhak of Vienna writes this statement, it has already been established that Eno la dayan ela ma she'einav ro'ot, you only follow your eyesight, means that you could follow a hunch, you could follow your gut feeling regarding the direction of the halakha. Says Rabbi Yitzhak of Vienna, לדורו הוא שכתב ולכיוצא בדורו. When Rashi wrote that, he was referring to himself. He was the great judge, or his contemporaries were great judges. שהייתה בהם תורה גדולה וברורה וחוכמה יתרה. They had a clarity of Torah and great wisdom. אבל עכשיו בימינו, שבעוונותינו הרבים נטמעתה תורה ועבדה החוכמה, but now in our generations that unfortunately there's less Torah, there's less wisdom. Remember this argument? Rabbi Yehuda Anasi, Rambam, Tur, Shulchan Aruch, everybody uses that. We don't know anything today. Wisdom has been forgotten or destroyed. Meshaber hani et ha'atzlanim. I praise those who are lazy, or those who are cautious, shelo yismechu al chokhmatam, who do not rely on their own wisdom, ve'al yoru lehakel, v'ikablu sachar al ha'prisha yoter min hadrisha. Let them not rely on their wisdom. Let them not rule in a lenient way, and this way they will be rewarded for not speaking more than they will be rewarded for speaking. He's using another story in the Talmud here. That is the quote from Or Zarua, and here Rabbi Ovadia Yosef adds Even more so in our generations, that we are much lesser than them. So, up to this point, we get to the conclusion that you cannot argue with the previous generations because you don't have the capacity. It's not even about the authority. It's not. You don't have the capacity to understand or to argue with them. And here, this statement, the amazing thing about this statement, as I mentioned before, is that it's made by Rabbi Yitzhak of Vienna, who is a direct disciple, second or third generation of Rabbi Shlomo Yitzhak Rashi. And he speaks about someone who lived 150, 200 years ago, and he says he was of a completely different caliber. We have no right to issue halacha based on our understanding. And that obviously ties the hands of the dayan, of a judge. Now, Rabbi Ovadia Yosef comes to the point that his pet peeve. He says, "Ra'iti lekama." I'm writing all this le'apukei mima sheraiti. I'm saying all this to oppose that opinion that I have seen. Kama mimechabrei zamanenu asher lo yir'u velo yachatu me'emat rabotenu harishonim. I see some of the contemporary authors who have no fear or reverence towards the authors of previous generations, whom water would drink, and they're not awestruck by the wisdom of those rabbis of the past, and because of that, they talk to them, they talk about them as one talks to his friend without reverence. They do not give respect to old age. And he quotes here a verse from Lamentations. ובזה גורמים לתת להם תורת כל אחד בידו לחלוק על הראשונים אשר משאתם יגורו אלים. He says, by doing so, now what is the great risk of doing so? You would have thought that the great risk of doing so is that you are going to somehow transgress the law. Because if you think that they do not have authority, then we reach some kind of anarchy, where people, but anarchy, guided anarchy. You go and ask the rabbi what to do, and he says you could do A, but he doesn't really understand the halacha, so that should have been the problem, that we have transgression. Instead, Rabbi Ovadia Yosef mentions the fear of each rabbi ruling differently. So what we want is unity, conformity. Instead, if you will allow people to have an opinion, they are going to be independent, they are going to create diversity, and that we don't know. We don't want. But there's no real argument here to say we know that legally or halachically you're not allowed to argue your point with someone who lived before you. He quotes for that purpose the Rosh. Again, we go back in time. Rosh Rabbeinu Asher, 14th century. Katav b'shem Ravad, who quotes Rabbi Avraham ben David of Poskera. Is the one who wrote all the criticism on Maimonides. He says this: "V'karov lomar." It means it's probably so. She'afilu haya dayan cholek al psak hagaon. Even if the Dayan, the current contemporary Dayan, disagrees with the Gaon, so remember I mentioned before that if you rule based on the Mishnah, technically you're okay. So read the discussion in the Talmud regarding the responsibility of the judge. They said this: Mishnah Hozer. Meaning, if the judge made a mistake, if the mistake was esoteric, it was in an obscure source that you're not expected to know, then the judge is not responsible for the loss incurred. But if it's Torah b'dvar Mishnah, if it's something that is clearly written in the Mishnah, Hozer, he must return, he must reverse the ruling, and if it's irreversible, he has to make amendments himself. For example, if you made Mr. A pay Mr. B a certain amount of money, and then it turns out that according to a clear-cut Mishnah, this should not have happened, he goes back to Mr. A and says, give the money back to Mr. B. But if that person who received the money fled the country and there's no way to reach him, then it will be the responsibility of the judge to pay back the one who was charged incorrectly. But and so the Rosh quotes the Ravad, who says, "Afilu haya dayan cholek al psak hagaon, gam ze to'eh b'dvar mishnahu." Even if the disagreement or the mistake was that the Dayan, the contemporary judge, disagrees with the ruling of the Gaon, gam ze to'eh b'dvar mishnahu. It's a mistake. This really sort of delegitimizes the Dayan. It tells them all you can do is regurgitate and present the words that were written by the Gaonim, and he's talking about the Gaonim of Babylonia. שאין לנו עתה לחלוק על דברי גאון אם לא בקושיה מפורסמת, וזהו דבר שלא נמצא. Says the only way we could disagree with the Gaon, when we're talking about the Babylonian Gaon, is if we have a question that is not only solid and strong, but also known traditionally. So you cannot innovate anything. וזה דבר שלא נמצא. So the conclusion of the Rosh and the Ravad, the conclusion of the Ravad is that you cannot really argue with the Gaonim of Babylonia. Remember that the Ravad is writing as a commentary his criticism on Maimonides, and Maimonides was the one who, despite giving great respect to the Babylonian Gaonim, ruled against them extensively. So maybe Ravad is attacking for that. ואף הראש שם שחולק עליו בזה, the Rosh himself, Rabbeinu Asher, who quotes the Ravad, disagrees with him. He says, you are entitled to disagree with the previous generations. He says, הרי כתב שם צריך שיהיה נגד הראיות, נגד הגאון, ראיות המקובלים לחכמי דורו. The Gaon must, the one who goes against the Gaon must provide a solid proof or solid argument. מה שאין כן, and that's now we're going back to the conclusion of Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, which is very confusing when you read his books to figure out where the quote ends and Rabbi Ovadia's words start. But here's this is Rabbi Ovadia Yosef. It says, "Ma she'en ken lismoch al svaratenu neged harishonim lo amara adam me'olam." All this is rayot hamekubalim. So rayot hamekubalim could be understood as proofs that were transmitted by oral tradition, or proofs that are accepted by other contemporaries. So that we understand, if a rabbi today would like to disagree with the previous psak, it is okay for him to call upon 3 colleagues or 2 colleagues to join him and to have a bedin. But they take it further. Lo amara adam me'olam. There's no way that you could rely on your reason and logic against the Gaonim. Now, but here's the move. He doesn't speak about the Gaonim anymore. Neged harishonim. Remember, the Gaonim are the Gaonim of Babylonia. They were the immediate successors of the world who produced the Talmud. So they have a certain say there. But now we move and we extend this to the Rishonim. It says ve'av b'raya chotechet יש לחתור להשיב כדי ליישב דברי הגאונים דכל רז לא אניס להו. Says, and even when you do have a solid proof against the Gaonim, you must do whatever is within your power to reconcile the words of the Gaonim with the if they don't fit the halacha as you see it, because they knew everything. So we see this trend again. The previous generations knew everything. They're the final word. We cannot argue with them. But then also the demand or the expectations that you would learn all the halachic literature that was created from that time until today. So we only got today to letter Dalit in the introduction of Yabia Omer, but it's an important introduction, and we'll read some more sections in the following session, Be'ezrat Hashem, next Thursday.